Welcome back, boxing fans. People are ridiculous. So John Boxing comes out and, of course, once again, deflects, which is what he does. We're talking about Tank Davis and how he's being compared to Canelo Alvarez. And the fact that Canelo Alvarez is held to such a high level of criticism, whereas Tank Davis is given a pass by many fans. John Boxing exposing himself being one of those fans. The LDBC is not one of those. They are fans who are actually pretty much against Tank Davis now and definitely pro Devin Haney. But John doesn't attack them or talk about their criticism and hate towards Tank Davis. I didn't put out hate. I'm just telling you facts. I'm comparing the fact that Canelo Alvarez, who at 34 years of age, 5 years older than Tank Davis. Yes, Tank Davis is 29. See, John Boxing knows how old Tank Davis is, but he continues to downplay. Say he's 27. No, he's 29. Going to be 30. So this fighter who is now 29 years old won his first world title at 21. So the question is, what has he been doing for the last 8 fucking years? What has he been doing for 8 years to try to be a star? Right? But what does John do? John pulls in Golovkin. As if somehow this is going to hurt my feelings. And the irony is, all those years ago, when I was calling for big fights and unification fights for Golovkin at 160 pounds, guys like John Boxing were doing the same thing to Golovkin that they're doing with Canelo Alvarez. Talking about fighters at 154. Not trying to get him to fight the other champions at his weight division. No. Because John and all these haters had no faith that guys like Sergio Martinez, Peter Quillen, Felix Sturm, Daniel Geale, Canelo Alvarez, Billy Joe Saunders, Peter Quillen, Danny Jacobs, they didn't have any faith that any of these world champions could beat Golovkin. So what did they do? They harped on unproven 154-pound black American fighters like Andrade and Charlo. Oh, and of course, Lara, who is the, adopted black American, right, that people love, because, of course, Golovkin would have proved himself by beating up guys moving up in weight, right? We know that wouldn't have happened because whenever he fought guys who moved up in weight, he was criticized for it. But in these cases, he had to fight these guys, or he had to fight a guy that was at 175 in Andre Ward to prove himself. He didn't need to fight any of the champions in his division, right? And the expectations I have for Tank Davis is to fight champions in his division. I'm not saying he needs to fight guys coming up in weight. I ain't picking dudes from lower weight divisions, trying to cherry pick opponents that I think maybe can beat him. I'm not picking opponents at 140 that I feel could cherry pick. I can cherry pick and beat him. I just asked him to fight unification fights against other world champions in the division that he was a world champion in. Same thing I asked for Canelo. Same thing I asked for every single other person in boxing. But John is so fixated that of course he always has to pull Golovkin into this conversation, and now compares Tank Davis to Golovkin, talking about how Golovkin wasn't until he was in his mid-30s before he was a champion. No, he was 27. 27 as an official WBA super champion. Obviously was a regular champion far earlier, probably 25, sometime around there. But, the problem with guys like John is they refuse to do the history for the whole boxing community. They'd rather just leap to conclusions and be ridiculous. It's the same way he criticizes Lomachenko, saying that Abdullah Mason is a better fighter at 19 years old than Lomachenko is at 25. Yet Abdullah Mason was fighting 6 and 8 rounders, whereas Lomachenko was fighting gold medal winning world championship level competition in 2 different Olympicses, right? But people say, these guys were fighting little kids when they're in the Olympics. Well, the first time you were around, you were the little kid fighting veterans. The second time around, you're a veteran fighting little kids or younger guys, right? Generally, that's how the Olympics works. So you could use that argument in his second run, But in the first round, when he was fighting older, more experienced Eastern European and Cuban fighters, he was the young guy. But then once again, John, who is so fixated on race that he doesn't want to give credit to anyone that's not a black American. Right? And that's what this comes down to. I'm talking about Canelo Alvarez and Tank Davis. And it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with perception. Perception from these YouTube channels from America who want to crucify and criticize Canelo. And this isn't black Americans. It's all kinds of fucking people. And John knows this, but he's so fixated on playing the victim that, of course, he has to make it black. And because I'm pointing out Tank Davis and the ridiculousness of some Tank Davis fanboys, now, of course, he has to use Golovkin in this argument, which makes no sense to me. Golovkin, unlike Tank Davis, was a two-time unified champion. The way Tank Davis is going, he may never be a unified champion. He didn't try to unify against anybody at 130, whether it was Lomachenko, who was too old and too experienced and inevitably would beat him, so we couldn't have him fight him. But he also didn't do it against Tevin Farmer, a light-punching, easy work type of an opponent. Right? He didn't do it against anybody. And since he's moved to lightweight, has he fought a world champion? No. He's become a champion now, the WBA super champion, but not by beating a champion. So don't go criticizing Golovkin, saying he didn't beat anyone to win that title. Well, he beat Daniel Geale, who was a two-time world champion. And the WBA felt that that opponent was enough to, at that point, elevate Golovkin, the long-reigning WBA regular champion, who had like 10 title defenses or more of his WBA regular title, to super champion, which is pretty normal. That happens all the time in boxing. But of course, with Golovkin, he'll get criticized for it. But Tank Davis, literally, it just happened to him. Right? Now he's literally a two-weight world champion because he got his second weight division the same way Golovkin did, except being far less impressive in making 10 title defenses of his WBA regular title and calling out unification fights against other world champions at 160 pounds, or in Tank's case, 135 pounds. What 135-pound champion has he ever tried to get a fight with? Zero. Nada. Nilch. Or zilch. Right? Like, you can criticize Golovkin. That's fine. I historically didn't hype up and fanboy and say Golovkin was a superstar. I said that all the champions were ducking him. You literally made videos defending guys like Sergio Martinez, Cotto, and Canelo for blatantly ducking Golovkin, saying that Golovkin was not a star. They weren't going to get paid the kind of money they deserved in a fight like that. So the risk-reward wasn't there. You literally made multiple videos defending those fighters. So it's ironic that now you want to twist words and act as if somehow I said Golovkin was a star. No, I didn't. I never did. I compared Golovkin historically the same way I compared Deontay Wilder. Two fighters that had impressive runs but never had the impressive opponents to really make a statement. The difference is Golovkin was a unified champion on 2 occasions and was a 2-time world champion, unlike Deontay Wilder. But you don't want to compare him to Wilder because Wilder would look bad in that comparison, even though you want to talk about 10 title defenses. Well, Golovkin made over 10 title defenses, but those were regular titles, so you don't want to give him credit for it. But it's no different than what Wilder was doing, because he wasn't fighting any other world champions in that process. He was only fighting WBC ranked opponents, right? So what's the difference? There is no difference. I mean, Golovkin was fighting for the same title that Bernard Hopkins was defending all the way to undisputed. It's not Golovkin's fault that the WBA was greedy and created 2 belts. No difference than the WBC, who created 2 titles as well. And then Lomachenko and Canelo were criticized because of that, as if it's their fault that the WBC and the WBA were too greedy. Fighters fight in the parameters that are put in front of them. They're not in power positions to dictate what happens moving forward. So they have to sort of find their feet within the system. If you want to criticize people, you have to criticize promotional companies who pay off these sanctioning bodies, and the sanctioning bodies who consistently are inconsistent, fanboy for some fighters, and basically fuck over others. Make mandatories with fighters who've never even beat a fighter in the top 15. So of course no one's going to get excited about it because nobody knows who those fighters are. But once again, you're going to make a video criticizing Golovkin. Golovkin, who's made millions and millions of dollars, has fought 3 fights with a pound-for-pound king in Canelo Alvarez. And because he didn't win those, now you want to hold that against him. Yet when you talk about Canelo, you criticize him because he didn't win those first 2 fights against Golovkin, in your opinion. So you're cherry-picking things basically just to hate on fighters because you're not being consistent. If you're being consistent, you would recognize that Golovkin deserved to win one of those first 2 fights, and that's why he gets praised as a pound-for-pound top fighter. This was a silver medal Olympian who became a 2-time middleweight champion with one of the highest KO percentages in middleweight championship history. Did he get all the fights he should have had? No. And guys like you justified it, allowing fighters to duck him and avoid him, yet then tried to push black American fighters towards him in fights that were less significant. How is him fighting a champion at 154 more significant than him unifying titles against world champions in his division? You literally bring up Kell Brook as a way to criticize Golovkin. But yet, anyone that knows anything about boxing understands that Golovkin never went looking for Kell Brook. He agreed to go to the UK to help build his profile since he couldn't get big-name fighters in America. So he was going to the UK to fight Chris Eubank, whose father is a superstar in England. And with that name recognition, they could do a huge event in the O2 Arena. So his team went there and met Chris Eubank's team. And then the unexpected happened. Chris Eubank chickened out, ran away from negotiation, and now, of course, the fight potentially was going to fall through. Eddie Hearn, Chris Eubank's promoter, didn't want to lose out on this big financial windfall of getting Golovkin to come to the UK. So then he convinced Kell Brook, an undefeated welterweight world champion, to do what other undefeated welterweight world champions in history have done: move up to take on the middleweight champion. It's been done many times. Marlon Starling did it. Sugar Ray Robinson did it. Tons of fighters in history moved from being the welterweight champion up to middleweight. But then you want to criticize Golovkin. But yet Golovkin didn't chase after Kell Brook. That wasn't the fight he was looking forward to. He was looking for a significant middleweight fight. But unfortunately, at his time as a middleweight champion, all the top middleweight fighters ducked him. Look at Canelo Alvarez the first time he was mandated to fight a unification fight with Golovkin. What did he do? He literally dropped his WBC title, giving it to Golovkin. Golovkin became a unified champion because Canelo Alvarez ducked him. But your hate for any fighter that's not a black American is so strong that you don't even want to be honest or truthful. You justified and defended fighters like Cotto, Canelo, and Sergio Martinez to blatantly duck Golovkin because you did not want Golovkin to get the big name opponents on his resume. And now years later, you want to use that against him. But I remember everything you said. The fucking people that follow your channel, they don't care. Because you could blatantly say you said that and then come out and say the opposite, and they don't care because they're just as racist as you are. So they're happy when you push out this kind of racial content. But the truth is, I wasn't hating on Tank Davis. I was making a video comparing how Canelo Alvarez, the #1 fighter in boxing with the best resume and the most accolades in the sport, comes under such heavy scrutiny. Whereas a Tank Davis, who people call the face of American boxing, is allowed to fight virtual nobodies on pay-per-view. And if you want to talk about pay-per-view numbers, the only big successful pay-per-view fight that Tank Davis has been in was the fight with Ryan Garcia. Golovkin's had 3 million pay-per-view fights. Yes, all with Canelo Alvarez. But that's 3-1. Let's see if Tank Davis ever, ever, ever gets another million pay-per-view fight. Because he ain't going to get a million views fucking fighting Frank Martin. But leave your narratives to yourself, because you and I both know you're full of shit and you're a liar. Blatantly. Because you say things that aren't true consistently. The things I said about you, defending fighters to duck Golovkin, all factual. Those videos were there. If you didn't go out of your way to get my channel shut down, you could even see the response videos to your videos based on that time. But it is what it is. You can keep deflecting towards Golovkin, a retired fighter, as if somehow that defends and justifies the fact that Tank Davis is literally being criticized by black American boxing fans. Devin Haney fanboys are anti-fucking Tank Davis. And the biggest thing going on right now in America is Haney Tank Davis, the same as Spence versus Crawford. But you'd rather act as if somehow I'm hating on Tank Davis. No, I'm not. I'm just pointing out the difference from you and others, and how they rationalize Tank Davis and what he does, knockout boxing, the perfect example, and then they're critical of other people who've done more consistently. It's ironic, in your whole statement, you criticize Golovkin for never fighting a world champion, but then you fanboy Demetrius Andrade, who's never beaten a world champion. Never beaten a world champion. The dude's 36, 37 years old, almost as old as Golovkin. He's never beaten a world champion. And only in his last fight did he actually fight a world champion and got knocked out. But yes, Golovkin should have fought him, because that would have changed everything. That would have made him a superstar. Sure it would have. But leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Peace out. Hope you enjoyed the video. Enjoy your weekends.